The ringtone blared across the room, interrupting Karen's peaceful afternoon. She glanced down at the screen, her eyes narrowing at the school's name flashing across it. What could it possibly be now? She muttered, her lips pressed into a thin line. Her son had only been at this school for a few weeks, and already she'd received 2 calls about behavior concerns. Karen snatched up the phone and answered, her voice cool and controlled. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was calm, measured. "Hello, Mrs. Thompson. This is Principal Harper from Willow Ridge Elementary. I'm calling regarding your son, Ethan. There's a matter I'd like to discuss with you if you have a moment." Karen felt her irritation flare. She'd heard about this principal, new to the school and already causing waves, and a black woman no less. Karen's mind raced with assumptions, her annoyance growing. She'd seen the new principal once during morning drop-off, a professional-looking woman who seemed overly strict. Karen had even heard a few parents complain about her tough approach, though she'd brushed it off at the time. Now, that annoyance bubbled to the surface as she tightened her grip on the phone. "I don't see why I keep getting calls about Ethan," she began, her tone clipped. "He's just a kid, and kids get into little scuffles or misunderstand things. Why make a big deal out of it?" Principal Harper's tone remained calm, unshaken. "Of course, Mrs. Thompson. I understand that children sometimes act out, and we want to support Ethan's growth as best we can. But I believe this particular matter may benefit from a conversation between us, as it relates to Ethan's interactions with his classmates." Karen's eyes narrowed. Interactions with his classmates? The words felt loaded, like a polite way of saying her son had done something wrong. She let out a small scoff. "Look, Ms. Harper, or Principal Harper, whatever it is, Ethan's just energetic. I'm sure you're not used to managing that yet, given your, background, but I think this is being blown way out of proportion." There was a brief pause on the line, the silence almost uncomfortable. Principal Harper didn't rise to the bait. Instead, she simply replied, "I assure you, Mrs. Thompson, my focus is on Ethan's best interests and helping him thrive here at Willow Ridge. If you'd like to come by, I'd be more than happy to discuss ways we can support Ethan's growth together." Karen felt a flicker of irritation that her comment hadn't rattled the principal. She'd expected Harper to react, maybe even get defensive, but her voice remained steady, professional. "Is she ignoring me?" Karen thought, the idea making her grip the phone even tighter. "I'll be at the school tomorrow," she snapped, her tone leaving no room for argument. "And I expect a thorough explanation. None of this vague talk, Principal Harper. I want facts." Principal Harper's response was simple. "Of course, Mrs. Thompson. We'll see you then." Karen ended the call with a huff, tossing her phone down on the couch, her frustration simmering. Let's see what this so-called principal has to say, she thought. Little did she know that the meeting would be far more than she expected, and that her own perspective was about to face an unexpected challenge. The next afternoon, Karen marched through the polished hallways of Willow Ridge Elementary, her heels clicking sharply against the tiled floor. Her gaze was fixed straight ahead, her expression cold and unyielding. She'd spent the entire morning fuming over the call from Principal Harper, going over every possible way to set her straight about Ethan. When she reached the principal's office, she barely waited for the secretary's nod before pushing open the door. Principal Harper was seated behind her desk, calm and poised, her hands folded neatly in front of her. She looked up and greeted Karen with a warm smile. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Thompson. Thank you for coming in." Karen returned the smile with a tight one of her own, more a show of her discontent than actual politeness. "I'm here as you requested, Principal Harper. Let's get to the point, shall we?" Unfazed, Principal Harper gestured to the chair across from her. "Please, have a seat." She maintained eye contact as she spoke, her voice even and professional. I wanted to discuss a few incidents that have been brought to my attention regarding Ethan's interactions with some of his classmates. It seems there have been a few instances of unkind behavior. Karen's eyebrow arched. Unkind behavior, she echoed, her voice dripping with skepticism. Are you sure you're not reading too much into kids just being kids? Principal Harper held her gaze, calm and unwavering. I understand your concerns, Mrs. Thompson, and believe me, I know children will be children. But Ethan's actions, such as name-calling and excluding certain classmates during group activities, have become more frequent. It's important that we address this behavior early to help Ethan develop healthy, respectful relationships. Karen scoffed, rolling her eyes slightly. Respectful relationships? He is 7 years old, Principal. He's hardly going to start making life decisions right now. Principal Harper's expression didn't waver. Children are indeed learning and exploring boundaries, but part of our role as adults is to guide them toward positive behavior. Ethan's classmates are beginning to feel uncomfortable, and I believe it's an opportunity for us to support him in developing empathy. Karen narrowed her eyes, irritation clear in her voice. Look, Principal, maybe where you're from, people make a big fuss over kids' behavior, but I know my son. He's not a bully. This is just overreaction on your part. A flicker of something crossed Principal Harper's face. Disappointment, perhaps, but she quickly masked it with a calm smile. Mrs. Thompson, I'm aware that as Ethan's mother, you know him well. My only goal here is to foster a positive and inclusive environment for all our students. If we can work together to encourage that behavior in Ethan, I believe it will serve him well, both now and in the future. Karen folded her arms, giving the principal a look of smug satisfaction. And do you have any specific suggestions on how we're supposed to foster this behavior? Her tone was dripping with sarcasm, her gaze challenging. Principal Harper leaned forward slightly, her voice calm but firm. Yes, I do, Mrs. Thompson. I suggest we start with small exercises in empathy, helping Ethan understand that his words and actions affect others, even when he might not realize it. I'm here to work with him, not against him. Karen opened her mouth to retort, but something about Principal Harper's calm, composed manner stopped her. The principal's patience was unyielding, and the more Karen spoke, the clearer it became that she couldn't shake Harper's confidence. There was a quiet authority in the principal's words that she hadn't anticipated, and for the first time, Karen felt a flicker of discomfort. She straightened, crossing her arms a little more tightly. I'll think about it, she said curtly. But I still believe Ethan's behavior is perfectly normal. Principal Harper met her gaze, unshaken. Of course, Mrs. Thompson. Thank you for your time today, and please feel free to reach out if you have any concerns. Karen stood up, giving a small, forced nod before turning sharply and exiting the office. As she walked out of the building, her mind was racing. She'd expected to intimidate this principal, maybe even see her back down. But instead, Principal Harper had remained calm, firm, and, annoyingly, undeterred. Karen couldn't shake the feeling that the principal had seen right through her, and for a moment she felt strangely unsettled. But she quickly brushed it off, convincing herself she had been right all along. Little did she know, this encounter was only the beginning. As Karen settled into her kitchen that evening, still fuming from her encounter with Principal Harper, she decided it was time to talk to Ethan. She spotted him at the dining table, absent-mindedly drawing in his notebook. "Ethan, come here," she called, her voice sharper than usual. Ethan looked up, a little startled, and came over to join her. "Do you know why I had to go to your school today?" she began, crossing her arms. Ethan hesitated, casting a quick glance at her face, clearly sensing her frustration. "It was about what you've been doing to other kids in class," she continued. "Apparently, the principal thinks you're not being nice to some of them." Ethan's cheeks turned red, and he shuffled uncomfortably. "Yeah, I know," he mumbled. Principal Harper already talked to me about it. Karen's eyebrows shot up. Oh, she did she? And what exactly did she say? Her tone dripped with sarcasm, expecting him to echo her feelings about Harper's overbearing attitude. But to her surprise, Ethan looked down, fidgeting. She said that sometimes we hurt people without realizing it, and that it's important to make sure everyone feels like they belong. He paused, casting a worried glance at his mother. She wasn't mad. She just said she wanted to help me understand why it's important. Karen felt a flash of irritation, not at Ethan, but at Principal Harper. So she thinks she knows what's best for my son, does she? She opened her mouth to give a retort, but Ethan kept going, his voice quiet and earnest. Mom, she really cares, you know? He looked up at her, his gaze unusually serious. I think she just wants us to all be nice to each other. Karen blinked, momentarily thrown off. Since when does my son care so much about what his principal thinks? The seeds of doubt planted earlier in the day started to sprout, but she brushed them off quickly. She's putting ideas in your head, Karen muttered, more to herself than to Ethan. I don't care what she thinks. I know what's best for you. Ethan shrugged, sensing the end of the conversation, and slunk off to his room. But as Karen watched him go, she couldn't help but feel the tiniest prick of doubt. Had she misjudged this principal? No, she told herself firmly. I'm doing what's best for my son. Principal Harper has no right to act like she knows more than I do. Determined to prove herself right, Karen pulled out her laptop and began drafting a complaint email to the school board. She detailed her grievances, emphasizing Harper's unqualified leadership and how she overstepped boundaries. As she crafted her message, the words became more aggressive, almost as if she were trying to convince herself as much as the school board. Just as she was about to hit send, she noticed an article link shared on the school's website. Meet the leader who's transforming Willow Ridge Elementary. Curious, she clicked, her eyes narrowing as she scrolled down. There, in bold letters, was the headline, Former Civil Rights Advocate, now Principal at Willow Ridge, How Principal Harper is Making a Difference. The article detailed Principal Harper's journey from a lawyer dedicated to social justice to a principal committed to education reform. It highlighted her years of experience, her multiple awards, and a mission to promote inclusivity and empathy in the school system. Karen felt her cheeks flush as she read. So, she was a lawyer? Her mind raced, processing the details. She hadn't expected this, had never even imagined that the woman she dismissed so easily could have such an impressive background. In that moment, Karen's confidence wavered. She felt as though she'd been looking at Principal Harper through a warped lens, one that reflected her own assumptions rather than reality. The next day, Karen found herself back at the school, scheduled for another follow-up meeting with the principal. As she sat in the waiting area, her heart pounded, not with anger this time, but with an uncomfortable mixture of curiosity and embarrassment. When Principal Harper greeted her, there was a kindness in her eyes that Karen hadn't noticed before. It wasn't pity or defensiveness, just a quiet strength that left Karen feeling strangely unsettled. Thank you for coming, Mrs. Thompson, Principal Harper began, her voice gentle yet firm. I wanted to discuss some ways we can work together to support Ethan's social growth. We believe every child has unique strengths and potential. Karen took a deep breath, her voice softer than usual. I didn't realize you'd had such an extensive career. I saw the article on the website. Principal Harper smiled, nodding slightly. Yes, I've had the opportunity to work in a few different fields before joining education. Each experience has helped me understand and advocate for kids in a more meaningful way. She paused, looking Karen directly in the eyes. At the end of the day, my goal is simple: to make sure every child feels valued and safe, including Ethan. Something inside Karen softened. For the first time, she truly listened, her preconceptions momentarily falling away. She left the office that day with more questions than answers, her mind buzzing with an unfamiliar sense of humility. As Karen walked to her car, she caught sight of Ethan in the hallway, chatting with his friends, laughing freely. She realized that his newfound confidence, his growing empathy, might actually be a product of Principal Harper's influence. For the first time, Karen wondered if she'd been fighting the wrong battle all along. That evening, Karen sat at her kitchen table, the quiet hum of the house surrounding her as she absently sipped a cup of tea. The meeting with Principal Harper had left her with a discomfort she couldn't ignore, her own reflection in the tea's surface feeling distant and uneasy. She'd always been confident in her decisions and perspectives, especially when it came to her son. But today, something about Harper's calm confidence, her genuine concern for Ethan, had unsettled that certainty. Karen was drawn out of her thoughts by a faint rustling sound. Ethan had fallen asleep in the living room, his school bag open, with papers strewn across the coffee table. She walked over to tidy up and noticed a small, folded piece of notebook paper with "Thank you, Principal Harper," written in her son's neat handwriting. Curious, Karen opened it and began to read. "Dear Principal Harper, thank you for talking to me about kindness. I'm working on being a good friend to everyone. You taught me that everyone deserves a smile, even when it's hard, and I want to make you proud. My mom thinks I'm doing okay, but you helped me understand I could do better. Thanks again for helping me. Ethan." Karen's heart caught as she read. She hadn't expected Ethan to feel so strongly about Harper's guidance, or to credit her with such an important lesson. She'd told herself that she knew what was best for her son, that Principal Harper's interference was unnecessary, even misplaced. But now, holding his words in her hands, Karen felt something inside her shift. This wasn't what she had expected, certainly not from her own son. She found herself staring at the note, a faint heat rising to her cheeks. Maybe Harper had seen something in Ethan that she herself had missed. A notification on her phone startled her out of her thoughts. It was an email response from the school board. As she clicked on it, her heart skipped a beat, a mix of anticipation and worry pulsing through her veins. The email was polite, almost formal, but one line stood out. "We appreciate your feedback, Mrs. Thompson, and assure you that Principal Harper has proven herself to be a valuable asset to Willow Ridge Elementary, leading impactful programs focused on inclusivity, empathy, and student growth." Karen felt her face flush with a mixture of embarrassment and shame. The school board's message, though courteous, subtly suggested that her complaint had been unfounded, almost as if her assumptions had blinded her to the truth of who Harper was. How had she gotten this so wrong? She slumped into the couch, Ethan's note still in her hand, Harper's words from earlier echoing in her mind. "My goal is simple, to make sure every child feels valued and safe, including Ethan." Karen closed her eyes, feeling the weight of her own words and actions pressing down on her. For the first time in a long time, she was uncertain, her conviction shaken. She felt a need to do something, to make things right, to finally see Principal Harper for who she was and not through the lens of her own biases. Little did she know, she was about to reach a turning point that would change everything. The next day, Karen found herself unable to ignore the guilt lingering in her mind. Principal Harper's calm words, Ethan's heartfelt note, and the school board's response had all chipped away at her confidence. She decided that she needed closure, one last conversation with Harper to settle things, if only to ease her own conscience. After calling the school office, she scheduled a meeting for that afternoon. As she entered Harper's office, Karen felt a flicker of anxiety, a sensation she wasn't used to. She took a deep breath, steadying herself as the principal greeted her with the same warm, professional smile. "Thank you for meeting with me again, Principal Harper," Karen began, her voice softer than usual. She glanced away momentarily, searching for the right words. I came here to apologize. I think I misjudged you, and I think maybe I was too quick to assume things." Principal Harper's smile didn't falter. She nodded, her voice gentle. "Thank you, Mrs. Thompson. I appreciate your honesty." There was a pause, and then Karen found herself asking, "Why do you care so much about things like empathy and kindness? I mean, you're here to teach them math, reading, all those things, but you seem to go further." Principal Harper's expression softened, her gaze steady. She leaned forward slightly, as if sharing a personal story. "You're right. Academics are important, but I also believe in teaching students the values that will guide them for life. Values like empathy, respect, and kindness." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Growing up, I experienced a lot of prejudice. It took a few remarkable people to help me see past it, to show me that it was possible to rise above and treat others with dignity no matter what. That's what I want for our students, including Ethan." Karen felt a pang in her chest, realizing the weight of what Harper had just shared. This wasn't simply a principal enforcing rules or trying to meddle in her family's life. This was a person who had dedicated her career to helping children understand the importance of treating each other with respect. A lesson Harper herself had had to learn the hard way. I guess I didn't see it that way," Karen admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Ethan's lucky to have someone like you looking out for him." Principal Harper gave a small nod. "He's a wonderful child, Mrs. Thompson. He has a bright future ahead, and I'm here to support that however I can. My goal is simply to ensure every child feels valued and understood." Karen's eyes dropped to her hands, feeling a mix of shame and gratitude. She'd come into this office ready to dismiss Harper, yet here she was, humbled by her compassion and dedication. "Thank you, Principal Harper, for everything." Principal Harper smiled gently. "Thank you for taking the time to listen, Mrs. Thompson." As Karen left the office, she felt lighter, as though she had left behind some invisible burden. For the first time, she felt a sense of peace, her heart opening to a lesson she hadn't realized she'd needed. Principal Harper's quiet strength and dedication had shown her a different perspective, one that she couldn't ignore. Walking down the hallway, Karen spotted Ethan laughing with a group of his friends. She watched him for a moment, smiling to herself. Maybe, she thought, Harper had been right all along. As Karen walked back to her car, a strange sense of relief settled over her. The conversation with Principal Harper lingered in her mind, her words about dignity, kindness, and seeing the potential in every child. She had entered the school with the goal of asserting her authority as a parent, but now she realized how much her own perspective had been challenged, even changed. At home, Ethan was sitting in the living room, his backpack open beside him, happily chatting about his day at school. Karen paused, watching him from the doorway. There was an ease in his expression, a genuine happiness that struck her in a new light. He seemed so full of life, eager to share his experiences and ideas, qualities she was beginning to see Harper had helped nurture. Ethan looked up and noticed her watching him. "Mom," he called, waving her over. "Guess what Principal Harper talked about today?" Karen took a deep breath, then joined him on the couch, feeling a newfound openness in her heart. "Tell me, honey, I'd love to know." "She told us that everyone's got something unique about them, something that makes them special, and that if we respect each other, we can learn so much from everyone around us," he explained, his face lit up with enthusiasm. Karen felt a warmth bloom in her chest. Harper's message had reached Ethan, and in a way, it had reached her too. This principal, whom she'd so quickly dismissed, had shown her son values she hadn't fully embraced herself. "Ethan," Karen began, choosing her words carefully, "do you know how lucky you are to have a principal like her? Someone who cares about how you treat others?" Ethan nodded, smiling. "Yeah, she's awesome. She even said we can make mistakes, as long as we learn from them." Karen's heart tightened at his words, feeling as if they were meant just as much for her as they were for him. The principal's emphasis on growth and understanding resonated deeply, stirring a desire within Karen to be a better example for her son. "Thank you for telling me, Ethan," she said, her voice softer than he was used to. "And thank you for being so open to learning from her. I'm really proud of you." Ethan gave her a quick, shy hug, then returned to his homework, his trust in her unwavering. As she watched him, Karen knew that her journey wasn't over. Principal Harper had shown her a side of herself she hadn't been ready to face, but now she was willing to change, to open her heart to the values Harper had inspired in her own son. That night, after Ethan was in bed, Karen found herself reflecting on all that had happened. She'd come to understand that seeing people for who they truly are requires humility, patience, and a willingness to question one's own assumptions. Her encounter with Harper had challenged her, but it had also opened her eyes to the possibility of growth, something she now realized was a gift. With a quiet determination, Karen resolved to continue this journey. She knew that to truly support Ethan, she would have to embrace the values Harper had shown him: empathy, respect, and the courage to see beyond the surface. And with that promise to herself, Karen finally felt at peace.